In Elden Ring, there is a cookie that has been crumbling forever. It's home to an abandoned Nintendo save file, and an early 1920s slapstick comedy duo. However, despite this, it is also a place of worship and mourning that doesn't even give its employees health insurance. In this video, I hope to discover if there is a deal with Crumbling Farum Azula, and what the terms of the deal in question are. In order to access this joint, you need to go to a big bowl and light up. But not in the illegal Schedule 9 narcotic way, in the self-immolation way. Fortunately, you have had some weird horse girl stalking you throughout your journey, so you can just use her. There is another way, but it does not involve human sacrifice, so it's kinda boring. This whole process will result in you teleporting to Crumbling Farum Azula. You get dumped on some random broken bridge with a dead dragon. There are a bunch of smaller dragons circling around the zone, which makes for quite an interesting sight. Rarely do From Software games have more than like 3 guys staring at a wall when it comes to background NPCs. You get hit with the title card just as you approach the massive tornado at the center of the cookie that crumbles. You can also get a direct look at the end of the zone from here. The enemies of this zone are predominantly beastmen. On your first playthrough, they can be quite intimidating because they attack really fast. But through the power of New Game Plus, you can infuse your weapons with horse tranquilizer and ship them off to a distant rehab facility. The first part of this zone is called Crumbling Beast Grave, which makes sense because all of those skeletons embedded in concrete are interred beastmen. Now of course we have zero respect for their culture and funeral rites, so we just walk all over them. The dragons don't seem to care either.
Dzień dobry, czy mogę prosić o 4 złote? Dziękuję.
As you head further into the zone, you get a greater sense of how this seems to be a big mausoleum or temple, so it makes sense as to why the beastmen attack us. Imagine if you were going to put some flowers on a relative's grave, and then some guy just rolled through it. That's basically what our rampage through their holy place equates to. There is actually a somewhat hidden area near the start of this zone. It has some fairly interesting implications. You can see it on the map, and you reach it by going down this fairly unremarkable elevator. It takes you to the bottom of the cookie that is crumbling, and you can get a good look at this amazing low detail floating rock. But the really beautiful part of this zone is when you turn around and see a bunch of guys vomiting worms. Now this is tourism. This area is quite big and there are a lot of Wormfaces inhabiting it. They even have some pet dogs hanging around. At the center of the area is a big pool of water with some Wormfaces praising God. In front of them is the reward of the area, which allows you to buy a higher level grave glovewort at the twin maiden husks. They don't really react to you unless you make them, which is a bad idea. There is also this really long ladder you can climb up to get to a platform with a cool view. Other than that though, there really isn't much to this area, but despite that it is probably one of the more intriguing places in the game, because how on earth did the Wormfaces even get here? We don't actually know much about them at all, mainly because they aren't really mentioned in the game, so their presence here could hint that maybe they originated from Crumbling Farum Azula, but they also can apply the Death Blight effect on you, which is only in the lands between because of Godwyn's death. My theory is that originally the Death Root might have corrupted some of the minor Erd trees and transformed the avatars and guardians into these Wormfaces, but for whatever reason that was cut from the game, so they kept one variant in the Altus Plateau around that minor Erd tree and put these Wormfaces in Crumbling Farum Azula for some reason, but I honestly have no idea if that is correct. The next Sight of Grace really illustrates how cool the lighting can be in this zone. It's a really bright and white light that mixes really well with the lighter colored environment. It can lead to some really striking shadows that contrast heavily with the natural lighting. You have to travel across these floating shards of the cookie that has crumbled and fight these skeletal beastmen. Something to note is that they drop human bone shards. It's difficult to say if that means they are potentially part human or formerly human. Maybe they just ate some guy who managed to travel to Crumbling Farum Azula without the human sacrifice. This does not make much sense to me, so I'm just gonna stick with their culture treats human bone shards like Funko Pop theory. You can also find this really big fursona strapped to a pole. Kinda weird, Miyazaki. The next area is the Dragon Temple, and it feels like the thematic focal point of the entire zone. It has quite a few interconnected passages that are fun to explore. Interestingly, this area is inhabited by a bunch of hostile knights. They are most likely in Crumbling Farum Azula in order to hunt dragons, so they can use their remains for dragon communion, which will make them stronger. However, alternatively, they are mostly present around this dragon temple area rather than the areas where dragons are found. This indicates that maybe they changed their ways and now worship the dragons. So I guess they are basically born again dragon worshippers, and probably attend protests against eating raw dragon hearts at dragon restaurants or something. These enemies can actually be quite tough if you try and fight more than one at the same time, but most of them can be easily backstabbed because they are just pondering. However, their difficulty does not compare to what waits for you at the center of this area. The Godskin Duo is the most clown level boss fight in Elden Ring. These guys are comedic. Their animations stretch all over the place like something out of an old cartoon. The same kind of cartoon that would have inspired One Piece, and all the absolutely bizarre and unhinged fights that occur in that franchise. This fight is supposed to be a bit frustrating because it's literally two bosses, but all their animations are so comedic I can't help but think, are the developers making fun of us? Are they using this fight to bully us? It's great. Once you beat the Godskin Duo, the area opens up in a kind of weird way. I think this is one of the only boss rooms with multiple entrances and exits. There is only one correct path, but they all kind of circle around back on each other in different ways, which can be a fun kind of confusing, especially after you have gotten all turned around during the boss fight. The correct path eventually leads you to a place where the lighting is really striking, and you can get a good look at the rest of the zone. If you look closely, you can also see a bunch of dragons embedded in the cliff face. Is there anything scarier than having your HUD fade in and being unable to find the enemy? The enemies down here are textbook cases of what happens when you don't floss. There is this really crazy window you get to jump through to progress. It has a banner next to it. For some reason I always forget that I have to jump through it on replays. I'm not sure if it's my favorite window in Elden Ring, but it's definitely in the conversation. The next building has a bunch of mummified beastmen priests which are kind of creepy. They remind me a bit of that one Junji Ito story. It sets a really foreboding atmosphere which is fitting, because the beastmen here are absolutely ruthless. For example, this one is using his sleeping friend as bait. What a terrible person. Let's just ignore that I was willing to attack a sleeping enemy. The way forward from here is yet another bridge of floating rubble. These beastmen contractors are absolutely terrible at their jobs. If you built a bridge like this in a suburban area, you would be chased down by some 6 PM local news show for the rest of your life. If you choose to not risk your life on that nightmare, you can continue up some stairs to find a stone sword key gate, and once you shove it into the skull of the statue, you will open up an elevator which takes you to quite an interesting place. The roof of the Dragon Temple. This is a place that you can see from all over the zone. It has a lot of skeleton guys. I assume lore-wise that this was probably some kind of convention center that they rented out for a human bone shard trading expo. You can find groups of them hanging from trees, which is actually kind of interesting, because why are they hanging like that? Was this some kind of punishment or ritual sacrifice? They are still alive though, so maybe it's like a fun recreational activity. Oh wait, I think I get it now. These guys are disgusting. You can find one of them having a conversation with a tree. This is something you can see some drunk guy do every day in the park around 10 AM. There is a sleeping dragon up here you can disturb, but there is an even cooler sleeping dragon on a floating structure. Personally, I just ran past him, but I could have totally beaten him up if I wanted to. Doing so actually takes you through the entire zone but backwards. You end up above the weird furry thing from earlier, which is kind of cool, because if you were observant you might have wondered if it was even possible to get up here. I just think it's really cool that they went to the effort of creating this massive hidden pathway that integrates so well with the entire zone. Once you finally summon the courage to cross the Beastman Contractor scam bridge, you can find a Crucible Knight who is just thinking about how meaningless his life has been up to this point, and how intensely depressed he is. I did not actually realize how much he was hurting. However, I soon found out. After this, you get to run across some rooftops, which lead to one of the nicest looking places in the zone, because it's pretty much the only spot that isn't covered in random skeletons. However, it has some really annoying pigeons, and there is this annoying dragon that keeps trying to snipe you from across the map. If you are observant, you can find this floating platform hidden to the side, which leads you to an elevator and a very special chest. Yes, this is the Drake Goon armor. With this equipment, you too can be one of Drake's goons. Once you make your way past the annoying dragon, there is an elevator which takes you to the bridge before the final fight of the zone. However, if you go in the other direction, you will eventually come to this area covered in corpses. Ordinarily, you would assume that they just hit the Estus flask a bit too hard, but you can find the murderer nearby. It's Bernahl, you know, that guy. He has this fairly strong crop dust attack, but you can just interrupt it and dust his crop. Once you beat him, he will drop the blasphemous claw, which can be used in Maliketh's boss fight. However, the interesting part of this item is that it tells us that Rykard and Ranni were allies when it came to subverting the greater will. The fact that Bernahl even has this item in the first place tells us that he was one of Rykard's most trusted servants, and that he potentially came to Crumbling Farum Azula for the same reason as us. The bridge to Maliketh's fight has the most annoying tree sentinel in the game. This guy has hit me through that fog gate so many times. I can't fault him for it though, because he has a really big club, and it's probably really fun to smack things with it. But at the same time, I feel he needs to learn to respect people's boundaries in public. So I murdered him. Maliketh's fight begins with him disguised as a beast clergyman. This is the same one called Gurranq that you can find in Dragonbarrow. Yeah, they are the same guy. The first phase is kind of annoying because he just keeps spamming pocket sand at you, which is great if you enjoy eating sand, but I personally only ever eat it if I am at someone's house and they serve it, because it would be rude if I didn't. The second phase of this fight is crazy. The cutscene reveals that the whole time the boss was actually a fursona. All of the annoying pocket sand attacks are replaced with crazy spinning attacks. Maliketh's blade also has traces of destined death in it. This results in your max health being reduced. It's honestly quite strong, but it's no match for the power of hiding behind a pillar while your summon attacks him. Maliketh's fight might seem like it came out of nowhere for one of the last bosses of the game, but he is actually quite important in the story. Maliketh is actually Marika's pet. To be more specific, he is her Nintendog. Just like everyone else who played that game, Marika eventually stopped one day, leaving her Nintendog alone for years, abandoned. However, unlike us, she also got her Nintendog to defend the Rune of Death at the end of time. So maybe when it comes to the Nintendog scale of morality, she's a bit worse than us. A long time ago, the Glow-Eyed Queen was an Empyrean who led the Godskin Apostles. Maliketh defeated her on behalf of Marika, and as a result, Marika took the Rune of Death from the Queen and got Maliketh to guard it. Of course, eventually Ranni came along to steal it and do her whole fratricide thing. Godwyn's death had a lot of repercussions, but one of them is that it caused Deathroot to appear all over the lands between, which Maliketh tried to collect under the guise of Gurranq in order to reassemble the Rune of Death, which we would then bust in and steal again. This also explains why the really annoying boss fight was in Crumbling Farum Azula. They were most likely here in order to try and regain some semblance of the Glow-Eyed Queen's power, which could potentially imply that maybe she is still alive somewhere. But then again, maybe they are just some bumbling comedic duo. I mean, look at them. That is straight out of some slapstick comedy movie. When you defeat Maliketh and return to the Sanctum, you will notice that you cannot hear the deafening roar of the tornado at the center of Crumbling Farum Azula. It's completely quiet. It makes for a very beautiful moment as you reflect on the Nintendogs that you have abandoned. It's rather fitting that if you complete Gurranq's questline, he will actually recognize you at the start of this boss fight. It's as if you took over Marika's Nintendog save file, only to abandon it all over again. That is the true prepare to cry. After you have conquered the cookie that crumbles, there is still one more thing for you to crumble. Dragonlord Placidusax. The path to his fight is quite cool. It's fairly hidden and you reach it by jumping down onto some hidden platforms, which lead you right to the source of the tornado, where naturally you just go to sleep. Of course, this causes you to travel travel to a time where the cookie was not crumbling, and was in fact a massive arena. At the center you can find Placidusax sleeping, but he smells your stank and it rouses him. The fight with Placidusax is pretty good. Usually I find fights with beast enemies in these games to be a little bit annoying. It can be difficult to see their moves because they are as big as Yo Mama. The camera can't really frame their girth, but Placidusax doesn't really have this problem because he does hit the gym fairly often. He also telegraphs his moves using red lightning appearing on the ground, so you can avoid a lot of the attacks without needing to look directly at him. Placidusax is an interesting character in the story. He was the equivalent of an Elden Lord for a different god that existed before the Erd Tree. Eventually the tree came and completely owned Placidusax's god, and one of Placidusax's heads was cut off in the process. Now the person who did this could have been Godfrey because we know that he fought someone referred to as the Stormlord, but the description of the Elden Lord armor implies that this occurred after the war with the giants, so the Stormlord could be someone else instead of Placidusax, such as a potential Lord of Stormvale, which is near a place called Storm Hill, and Storm Hill is really stormy, so I guess two separate guys just liked storms enough to be a Stormlord. Or alternatively, maybe they were connected somehow, and the Stormlord in Limgrave potentially worshipped Placidusax and the other dragons. Limgrave is the place in the game with the majority of the wreckage from the cookie that crumbled. All of those random stone objects are from Crumbling Farum Azula, which could potentially mean that Farum Azula was once close to Limgrave and Stormvale. This lends even more credence to a relation between the former Lord of Stormvale and Placidusax. So what exactly is the deal with Crumbling Farum Azula? Well, it's hard to say what the exact deal is, but I think I have a solid approximation of the deal and its terms. I believe that Crumbling Farum Azula was part of the civilization that existed before the Erd Tree, the civilization that worshipped an alternative outer god that was supplanted by the Greater Will. So basically, just like in Dark Souls, there was a primordial world inhabited by dragons that was destroyed by the gods of the present era. I believe that the beastmen were the equivalent of humans for this era, in the sense that they were just some guys doing stuff, while big guys did more important stuff. This explains why they inhabit this piece of an ancient civilization, why their dead are interred there, and why their undead do whatever this is. The prayer book that you can find on the path behind the sleeping dragon that I could totally beat gives you two incantations which tell us that red lightning is the weapon wielded by ancient dragons, and it just so happens all of the dragons in the cookie that crumbles use red lightning. These ancient dragons are different to the ones in the lands between, which are mostly children of Grail, who we can assume was born after the Erd Tree caused the cookie to crumble, which makes Grail more of an elder dragon than an ancient one. There are actually a lot of differences between these two types of dragons, but it's too much detail to go into for this video. So to put it simply, we know that the dragons found in Crumbling Farum Azula existed before the Erd Tree came to this world, and because they are so strongly associated with Crumbling Farum Azula, it's safe to say that it is part of that ancient civilization. Therefore, the deal with Crumbling Farum Azula is that it's just Ash Lake the Squeakquel. They are both glimpses at the ancient land of dragons before the gods came and tuned them up. If you enjoyed this video, you should subscribe to my channel. It would look great on your resume.